All right, so we're going to get started. Today, we're actually switching programs. We worked in Photoshop first, then we worked in InDesign, and today is yet another pivot, and we're going to go into Adobe Illustrator, which is very, very similar to InDesign. I would say InDesign and Illustrator are kind of like cousins, and Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign are a little more, or maybe brother and sister, and Photoshop's the cousin. So they're just a little bit different, but Illustrator and InDesign are very close together. So a lot of what we learned in InDesign will apply to Illustrator, and a lot of what we're about to learn in Illustrator will apply back to InDesign. And today we're going to spend a lot of time working on developing skills with the pen tool. And the pen tool is just something that is really important for you to learn and to be comfortable with. And the only real way to be comfortable with it is to practice with it. So we're going to spend a whole bunch of time practicing with it today. But before that, I'm going to do a quick, this is only about 10 slides worth of lecture, but I want to talk about the difference between vector graphics and raster graphics, which is essentially what is Illustrator versus what is Photoshop, and why do we use them as separate entities. Raster graphics, so think Photoshop here, are an image that's made up of individual little pixels. So little dots of color. Actually, they're little squares of color. And those little squares are assigned a particular color. And when you put them all together, you end up with a beautiful image. So as we zoom in here on the right, you can actually see, right, the enlargement here. Each of those little pixels represents one of the colors on this flower. And we talk about in cameras, we talk about megapixels. So how many million pixels does the image have? Well, a pixel is fundamentally this little square. That is fundamentally a raster graphic. And they certainly have advantages. You have pixel by pixel colors, so you can actually make edits more easily. You can use something like a clone stamp tool to copy these pixels from one area to another area, because you're really just altering the color of those little squares. It's much easier to edit when there's complex colors involved, which is obviously important for photographs. It's easier to apply fancier effects to your particular image. They give you more flexibility on a particular image. But it does have some distinct disadvantages. If you continue to zoom in, or you enlarge the image to be bigger and bigger, at some point, you're going to see all those individual little squares. And some of you experienced this when you were doing the cutouts back in, what was it, exercise 107. You zoomed in too far and suddenly everything got choppy. The other thing is that raster file sizes are significantly larger than their equivalent vector graphics file sizes. So you guys also may have experienced this. Photoshop runs out of space, causes your computer to run slow, because there's so much information in these photographs. The images take more computer memory and more computer power to work well with. Vector graphics, on the other hand, are graphics that are defined by math. So we use math to define. So let's use a square for an example. A square is made up of two control points, right? If we were setting up a square here, we could identify this as a control point. That would be 0.00. And let's say it's 2 by 2. This control point here would be 0.22. And all we're telling the computer is draw a square with corner points on these two and fill it with red, or give it a stroke of blue. So it's a very simple set of instructions that's letting us have this graphic on our page. So it has some real big advantages. Big advantage number one is that you can scale the image without distorting it. You can make it much, much larger. You could take a logo that you designed on your computer and you could blow it up and put it on a billboard beside the freeway. And you wouldn't lose any image quality. The other big advantage is that the file sizes are really small. So almost any computer program can, or a computer can open it and work with it because it's very small. It's driven by math. So you say, well, why don't we have all images as vector graphics? Well, there are some distinct disadvantages to vector graphics as well. The vector images are not as good as photographs for fine color changes. or high complexity. And I think this image here is probably the best explanation of the two. So this one is the photograph. And so that would be our raster. This would be our vector of the same image. And if you look carefully in here, you can see that there are kind of color regions that have been identified. And it almost looks a little bit blotchy because we can't get the smooth transitions between colors because it's built up as a series of shapes defined by math. Vector graphics also aren't as universal. Almost any device we have can open a photograph without a problem. You throw a JPEG at it, it's going to open. Vector graphics can be a little bit more specific. Sometimes you need a special piece of software to open that particular graphic. So when do we use raster and when do we use vector? Rasters are fundamentally about photographs, high dynamic range images, and that's about it. Vector graphics are line drawings, which would include architectural drawings, logos, and fonts. Fonts are an unexpected one, but think about it. You can blow a font up. You can make a font bigger and bigger in size, and it never distorts. You never get pixelated edges. So it is fundamentally a vector graphic as well. So here's a side-by-side comparison. They're using this logo right here, this red logo. The resolution is listed here, and its vector size and its bitmap size. Bitmap is basically raster. Okay, so in its very small form right here, the bitmap size is still almost double what the vector size is. But look what happens when we increase this, right? The vector size stays the same. The bitmap size, or the raster size, gets significantly larger. What if we bump it up to the next level here? Look at that. It goes all the way up to 2 MB file versus the same file each time. So the size doesn't change in a vector graphic. It's consistent. You can make it as large or as small as you want. So on this image over here on the right, the logo is vector graphics, the type is vector graphics, and the photograph is raster. Here's another example. Same logo. If we blow up the little tip on the wing, they're using one of these little wing tips as an example. If we blow it up to 1600%, you can see that it's perfectly smooth along the edges. If we took a raster image the same size and blew it up, look at the pixels that we see, the individual color squares. So that's a distinct difference between vector and raster graphics. So computer programs generally fall into one of these two categories, at least design programs. The raster graphics are things like Photoshop or V-Ray. Those of you in my 136, we've worked a lot with V-Ray already this semester, but that is a raster program. It's creating a raster graphic. Vector, on the other hand, Illustrator, InDesign, AutoCAD, Vectorworks, Revit, Rhino, all of those are programs that are defined by math, and we're creating vector graphics. So I think this early, it's just important for you to understand the difference between these two. Like I said, it's a short set of slides today because we're going to spend a lot more time in the demonstration, and then actually we're going to finish a little bit early because I want to give you extra time for practice. So if you get out, if I let you out, let's say a half hour early today from lecture, you can spend that much more time in your lab getting really comfortable with the pen tool. So let's take a look at Adobe Illustrator. So I've pulled up exercise 113. We'll come back and reference that in just a second. But let's take a fundamental look at Illustrator. So I'm going to open up Adobe here. Oh, and I should point out, I think it was Anna that noticed that the newest version of InDesign from last class, they've changed the name of masters to be parents. So now instead of a master, you have a parent. And so it hadn't been updated on the school computer. It wasn't updated on my computer, but you may have run into that problem. So I wanted to acknowledge that that was changed. Okay, so we've gone ahead and we've opened up Illustrator. We're going to open a file that we'll download, but I'm going to open just the letters file for just a second because I want to point out what's going on in Illustrator. So when Illustrator opens up, it looks almost identical to InDesign. We have our page in the center. That's the active area that we're going to be working on, or the artboard. We have a set of toolbars running down the left side. They're similar, but missing some key things like the frame tool is gone. And we've added some new tools, like this shape builder tool, for example. We've also kind of emphasized the pen tool right there. That's what we're going to be working with right now. Okay. On the right side of the page, right now we have properties showing. That'll be kind of your default view. We also have layers that we can look at. And the libraries we're going to very rarely use in this class. So we'll stick with our fundamental layout here. So like I said, I've opened up your exercise for today. Right there, exercise 113. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, there is a download Illustrator template for exercise 113. So I want you to right click on that and say save link as. We're going to put it on my OneDrive. And I'm going to call this spring of 2022. And we'll go ahead and save that. Now remember, it tells me I can't download it right away. So we have to click the up arrow and choose keep. And then it's going to go ahead and download it for me. So if I went to that same location here, and I can then double click and open this file right there. For some reason, my clicks aren't showing. Hold on one second. Let me see if I can fix that problem. No, still no. Okay, hold on. I want you guys to be able to see what my clicks are. So let's try closing that and reopening it. You're getting the tour of the back end, the programs that I use. There we go. Now we're seeing the clicks. Those are the programs that I use to show things like my mouse clicks and what have you. So we've gone ahead and we've opened this template. This is from a website called Calligrapher, which will actually allow you to make your own font. So you could print this out, you could write your each of the letters, and it would make a font out of your handwriting. That's what it's designed to do. We're going to use it today as just practice. And you'll see in the exercise, if I were to pull that one back up here, down here, the making your font, those are all optional, part 2, 3, 4, but you could actually upload this image to their website and create a font for yourself. But let's stick over here in Illustrator for right now. And I have some different templates that are available in this file. So let's look first at our layers. So if I click on the layers tab over here, the layers window shows up, and you can see that I have a page 1, a page 2, I have a guides, I have a font page 1 and a font page 2. So if I were to turn all of these off and just turn on page 1, you'd see there's page 1. If I turn on page 2, there's page 2, and they have different letters. So page 1 has the uppercase letters and some of the punctuation here. Page 2 has the lowercase letters and a few of the remaining uppercase letters. Guides are some guidelines that I put in, and I've put some extra, let me press Control+ here to zoom in, some extra little text in here to help kind of identify. We've got a cap height, we've got an X height, we've got a baseline, and we've got a maximum descender. Okay. Then I also have font page 1 and font page 2 are just 2 layers. And those layers are what I want to use to actually draw the font. So let's turn off page 2. And here we are. Font page 1 is my active layer. I've got font page 1 showing. So this is highlighted in blue. And let's look at our first letter over here. So I'm going to start with the letter A. I'll come over here to my pen tool. I could also press the letter P to start the pen tool, and this will let me start drawing with the pen tool. Now, initially, this is pretty easy because all I'm going to do is I'm going to click, and that's going to start my first control point. I'm going to come up to my cap height, I'll click, and then I'm going to come back down to create the other side of the A, like that. Now in this example, you see that I can keep going, but I don't want to keep going. So at this point, I'm going to switch back to my regular black arrow here, and I've drawn the up and down. Now, this is currently filled with white. We can't see it because it's on a white background, but if I change the fill color to say something like red, you could see that it's actually filled in with a color. So I want to make sure that it's not filled in with anything, and I'll do that by clicking this little slash. Now it's transparent. So with that being transparent, I can come back to the pen tool, and I could go ahead and I could draw a line across to make the crossbar of the A. Let me zoom in here a little bit more. Control plus, sorry. Control plus, because I'm on a Windows machine, like that. Okay, so when I did that, I want to draw across. Now notice though, when I hover my mouse over my line here, I get a pen tool with a plus. That pen tool with a plus is actually allowing me to add an anchor point on this line. So it's adding a control point to that line. So I'm not actually creating a new line. I'm creating a point on top of this line. So that might not be what we want. So in this scenario, I want to be next to the line, but not quite on top of it. So I want it to show up with that little star. And then I can come across and I can draw my line. Now on this side, I can actually, you can see that I can come over to where it intersects, like that. And that then creates my little crossbar. And I'll finish it. Now, I don't want this little piece to extend past, so I want to manipulate that. And you can see right now that I have a box around my line, and I could work with my box and shrink the line. But I can also use something with a little bit finer control, and that is the direct selection tool. It's the white arrow right here. And so that direct selection tool will actually allow me to click on the anchor of this line and then move that anchor wherever I want it to go. So I could move it to where it intersects with my original line. And there I have created my first letter. Now maybe you want this to be a little bit thicker. So I'll select all of my lines using the regular selection tool, the black arrow. I'll select all of my lines. We can go over to properties, and we could increase the stroke width. So I can make that thicker. And while we're playing with that, let's look at the top and the bottoms here. We have some options when it comes to stroke. Let me click on the stroke menu, which gives me more options here. We can control how the end happens. So I could round off the ends if I wanted to, or I could keep them flat, or I could extend them a little bit beyond. I'm going to stick with just the regular straight ends. We also have corner. Right now it's a sharp corner, but I could choose to round the corner. I could choose to chamfer the corner, so I'd get like a little flat spot on top. Those are all different options for my initial letter here. So let's say that I like that. Let's move on to our next letter. I'm going to press the space bar to be able to pan. And we'll come down here to our B. So once again, I'll come back to the pen tool. I'm going to draw a straight line, and the guides will kind of help me draw a straight line. I could also hold down the Shift key if I wanted to. Oh, it's not letting me. Let me hold down the Shift key. There it is, nice and straight. I'll click. Now, as I start to draw this, I want to draw the bottom of the B. So I would come over here to draw the bottom bar of the B, but then I'm coming into an arc. And so thus far, everything we've done has been like straight segments. So I'd be doing it like this, and then maybe coming back. But maybe I want that to be curved. So let me undo. I'm going to press Control Z twice. There it is. If I want this part to be curved, what I'm going to do, instead of single clicking, I'm going to click, hold, and drag. So click, hold, drag the mouse. And as I do that, I start to create a tangent line. And that tangent line then lets me create this part of the B. Now I'm coming back up here. I want this to be straight. So I'll just do a single click. And then we'll come over here to where it intersects. Actually, we have to be close to it like that. And there it's drawn that part of the B. I'm going to go back up to the top. So I'll use my regular selection tool. Then I'll go back to the pen tool. And I'm going to start at the top here. Now notice when I start at the top and I go to an existing control point, I get a little slash next to it. That's a continuation of my line. So I'll continue my line. We'll go to this point. I'm going to come down here and click, hold, and drag. Click, hold, drag to create that part of the B. And then I'll come back down to right about there. Now, whenever you work with this, it doesn't always turn out exactly as you want. So maybe I didn't like how this B came in. Well, I can always come back using the white arrow, the direct select tool, and I can actually edit these after the fact. So I can move that point around and say, you know, I wanted that to be a little bit bigger. I can also adjust the tangent line. I can make that one a little bit longer, which adjusts the curvature. I could take this line and I can move it down. And it's jumping too much. Let's drop it and then come back. Like that. So you can manipulate these after the fact. I could also take all of those lines. It's all one line, actually. I could go back to stroke and I can make it have a hard corner like that. And I've now created the B. So the C, well, actually, let's do the D here. I'll skip over and we'll start the D. Let me hold down space bar so I could pan. We'll do the vertical first. There it is. This is just one large click, hold, drag, click, hold, drag. And there it is. And I could come back to that part there, assuming that's the kind of D that I wanted. Maybe I want to flatten out that D just a little bit, in which case I could select this control point and I could actually drag this down a little bit further if I wanted to. I could also have put a straight segment in there before I started the D. So this is designed to be somewhat flexible. E, pretty easy, right? You're coming over here, you're drawing the straight bar here. There, I come back up, go back to the pen tool, start at the top. There you go to right about there. Now here's a tip, start out and go back toward my line, and that creates the third bar there. Now, when we get to F, for example, it may be beneficial to just copy this. So let me select the E. I'll go to edit and then copy, and then edit and then paste. And I could then drag this over to the F. And in this scenario, I want to get rid of the bottom, but it's attached to the rest of this. So in order to do that, I need to actually delete this endpoint. So if I use my direct select tool, the white arrow, and I click just on that anchor point right there and press the delete key, it will delete the anchor point and the line segment that's attached to it back to this point. So I'll have it selected, I'll press the delete key on my keyboard, and now that part goes away. So let's come back over here to the C. So in this example, right, I would need to start out with my C. We'll do a single click here. I'd pick a point at the top, click, drag, click, hold, drag. Pick a point on kind of the side here in the middle, click, hold, drag. Pick a point down at the bottom, click, hold, drag. And then pick a point where it ends. Maybe like that. Now, that's not a bad C. But that takes years of practice to be able to just draw it and to know where to choose the points. All too often, I see people who create too many points. They say, oh, let me put a point here. 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 And you end up with something that's much more wobbly as it goes around because there's just too many control points. So really think about tangencies. You start here, one point in the middle, one point in the middle here, and one point there to create a nice smooth arc rather than this shape. The other strategy on this, though, if you don't want to just draw it completely from scratch, would be to use a shape to your advantage. So I could come over here and I could use the ellipse tool. And I could draw a perfect ellipse. It looks an awful lot like an O. I've got that nice smooth arc, but I want to change where the start and stop points are. And obviously I don't need this right side here. So I can once again, right, I could use my direct select. I could pick this anchor point and press delete. That would give me half the C. But I really would rather have it stop right about there or right about there. So instead, I'm going to use the pen tool and I'm going to add an anchor point. Remember when it turns to have that little plus sign on it, I'm going to add an anchor point where I want the top to be, and I'll add an anchor point where I want the bottom to be. Now, if I came in with my direct select and I selected this control point and pressed delete, it would go back to where I just created those 2 points and give me the C. So that might be an even easier method of creating the C. Let's practice it again over here with the G. So here's the G. I'll do the same thing. I'm going to use my ellipse tool to create the base. Maybe it's about like that. Then I'll use my pen tool to establish where I want the top to be. Right there. And I'd actually like my G to come across right there. So if I deleted this, I would lose that line segment. If I deleted that point, I'd lose these 2 line segments. So I actually need a third point. And it doesn't matter where it is. I just need one in between. And then with that point in between, if I were to press delete, it would delete the 2 segments attached to it. Then I can use my pen tool, come over here, and come across, and draw the G. H is pretty easy, just straight lines. O is pretty easy. So we work our way all the way down to the hardest letter of the bunch, the S. So the S, there's different strategies, right? I could use the ellipse tool to create one ellipse here, followed by a slightly larger ellipse down below. And then I have to do some careful trimming. So I'd come in here using my pen tool. I'd identify where I wanted to start. Then I'd use my direct select to select, oops, sorry, didn't actually create the point. Try that again. There it is. I'd use my direct select to select this point there and press delete. That would give me that part. Now, as the S comes around, I want to control where the end would be. No, it doesn't want to do it for me. And select it, come back here with the pen tool. Let's see. There we go. That's where I want the end to be. Use my direct select. I'll select that anchor point, press delete. And now I have the bottom of the S and I have the top of the S, but they're not connected together. So since they're not connected together, I really need to connect them together. Oops, that was the wrong command. I'm sorry. There we go. Control plus. Okay, so I can do that in 2 different ways. Let me close this. I can come back to the pen tool. I could start there, come over to where I meet that, and it would connect them together. Alternatively, I could use my direct select, and I could select those 2 endpoints and then come over here, and under the anchors section, I have the ability to connect selected endpoints. So I could click on that, and it's going to connect those two endpoints together, making one curve out of it. The alternative would be to use the pen tool and to actually create the S. So in this scenario, I would start here, click, hold, drag for the top. We're looking for a tangent line here. So click, hold, drag to create that tangent. A point in the middle, click, hold, drag. Point in the middle here, click, hold, drag. Point in the middle right there, click, hold, drag. And we could come back up and finish off the S there. So slightly different strategy, but you could draw it completely by hand. And maybe that gives you a little bit more control, or maybe it lets you change the arc a little bit. But again, that takes a lot of practice. So let me press Control 0 so we can see the whole thing. So you're going to work your way through all of the letters. When you're done with this first page, you'll go back to your layers. You'll turn off font page 1. You'll turn off page 1. You'll turn on page 2. And you'll turn on font page 2. And you can continue with the lowercase letters. The goal for you today, like I said, is to work, well, I'd say 2.5 hours. Normally it's 2 hours for the lab, but I'm giving you a little bit of extra time right now because we'll finish a little bit early today. And that's because I want you to have that extra practice. The pen tool is really, really valuable going forward. The key, though, is that you have to put in the time to really learn it well. I'm trying to think of anything else that might be beneficial for you with the pen tool. Let me turn those back on. When you're done creating your letters, again, that's the most important thing. We can play around with some of the other options. Let me press Control+ here. We could look at, say, this letter. If we go over into our properties, you can see that there is more, right? There's the stroke. I've opened up the stroke. Down here under Profile, you can actually choose to make it thicker or thinner from a look standpoint. You could choose to have it kind of have wedged ends, get thicker in the middle. So those are options that are available to you if you wanted to play around with some of that kind of style-wise. This class really isn't about the style. It's more about just practicing with the pen tool and getting the letter forms down. But some people like to try to extend it, so I wanted to at least show you that that exists as an option. We'll cover that in more detail in a couple lectures. So it's not something that you'll miss out on if you don't play around with it today. So really, this is about practice. It's about getting comfortable with the pen tool. Remember, the big thing is, and I guess the thing that people get stuck on a lot is, how do you delete a particular segment? How do you cut or trim a particular segment? So it's always about creating the line segment and then going in with the pen tool, identifying the place that you want to start the cut. So right there, identifying the other place, and then making sure you have a point in the middle. So in this example, there's my point in the middle, and I could go ahead and I could delete it. Okay, so I'm going to let you guys go. As promised, you get out a little bit early today. I want you to spend that 2.5 hours wisely. Okay, so yeah, if anybody has any questions, of course, I'm happy to answer your questions today. I will see all of you in your check-ins today, or those of you that have check-ins today. So if you end up struggling with this or have some trouble, it'd be great if you got started on it and you could ask about it. Again, it's about practice. Remember, I have an easier time doing these because I've been doing Illustrator for, I don't know, 18 years. So it's just practice. And I want to get you up to speed as quickly as I can. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the share. If anybody has any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I'll see you in your lab check-ins today.